Hi, I'm Feroz Khan, and welcome to Drag and Drop Low Code Unplugged, the podcast where we explore the game changing impact of low code in software development. Join me in insightful conversations with IT leaders and passionate low code enthusiasts who are at the forefront of this digital evolution. Together, we'll explore how early adoption of low code is giving businesses a competitive edge on a global scale. We'll discuss its impact on software development, dissect its role in transforming businesses, and uncover the ways in which it's reshaping career trajectories. So whether you're a seasoned IT professional or a curious enthusiast, be sure to tune in as we share success stories and unravel the mysteries of low code. Subscribe now and stay tuned for a front row seat to the revolution that's shaping the future of technology. So let's go. Hey Taka, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for agreeing to be on the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
Sure.
I nearly kind of thought, should I call you Taka or should I call you Neo after everyone now knows you're kind of the Neo of Amsterdam?
People were not supposed to know, but it's fine. You're
Yeah,
not the
I
only
think you're
one.
good
Everybody
now.
else does the same thing. I'm like, what are you talking about? Just roll my eyes.
Is that the first time you've done it or have you done it before?
So I did it in Denver, and
Okay.
I'm funny because I was a mascot for the Atlanta Humane Society one time in college, and I really
Yeah,
enjoyed that. It's just fun because like people
yeah,
just are just happy and they smile.
yeah,
So I actually love being a mascot. It's
yeah.
probably my other life path I could have taken, but so I mean, I volunteered like this year, this time or last, this recent
Mm,
conference. I half jokingly said, "Hey, if you can't find anyone to be a mascot, then I'll go do it." So
yeah,
Andrea's like, "Okay, we need someone." I'm like, "Okay, I'll be there."
yeah. I think in Lisbon people might expect you there again, even if it's not you. Whoever's in there, they'll probably think it's you.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. Yeah, that was really fun. I really enjoyed it. It was well worth the fun. And again, seeing people smiling and being happy,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that was fun. That was fun.
yeah. No, amazing. Well, yeah, it'd be good to, for those that don't know who you are, for you to share a bit of background about yourself, who you are, where you're from, kind of where it all started.
Yeah, so I'll just start very quickly on like my early days. So I was born in Japan,
Sure.
and that surprises people because I don't have an accent. I can make a
Yeah.
fake Japanese accent, I can just fake it. But yeah, I was born in Japan, but I grew up mostly in New Jersey. That's where most of my younger, time was, and then I ended up going to Georgia Tech for college, so that's how I ended up in Georgia. But yeah, like as far as like technology, I was obsessed with like robotics when I was little. Like I just was like, these are the coolest things in the world since elementary
Yeah.
school. And then I'm like, well, to learn robotics, you have to know computers. So then I started learning computers. My brother, helped me learn a little bit of basic when I was in elementary school. Um, and then going to college, I ended up picking Georgia Tech because I couldn't get into some of the other ones like UCLA.
Yeah.
But went to Georgia Tech and I picked, doing computer hardware. Actually, I wanted to do like computer hardware design because I really thought like I had a lot of computer science friends, but I was like,
Mm,
software is easier to learn on your own. Hardware probably isn't, so I went the hardware
yeah.
route. And then I learned something called embedded design or firmware design in college, and I was like, wow, this is awesome because it's kind of like hardware software for like small devices, IoTs, robotics.
Mm,
So that was my love actually coming out of college. That was my favorite course, and I did that for a couple of years. And then there was a time where career transition. I saw like the mobile phone come out, the smartphones come out. I was like,
yeah.
this looks like the future. Before that, I started teaching myself like web development just because I thought that was kind of a fun thing to learn on the
Yeah.
side. But mobile, devices started coming out. I'm like, okay, I want to learn like mobile development, and so that's kind of my early stages of how I was like looking into technology and my obsession with that, I guess.
Yeah. And when you were learning software development, what stack were you kind of learning or
Yeah,
multiple?
so out of college, doing embedded firmware development, you're doing assembly language in C. That was primarily
Mm,
it. And then, like I said, on my own, I started learning web technology. So like MySQL, PHP, right? That was my
yeah.
interest on the side, starting learning. And then mobile development. There was a company called Accelerator. I think they started in Atlanta. They were basically
Mm.
cross-platform JavaScript-based mobile application development platform. So I started learning that. I got certified in that just because, like I said, I thought that was the future, like mobile app development.
Yeah,
So those were the different stacks. So I'm not even a .NET or Java developer. Like I was not like the
yeah,
server-side application developer kind of thing.
yeah. And you're I think this year you're coming up to 10 years without systems. When did you
Crazy.
actually first hear about, was it when how did the OutSystems role come about? But also, had you heard of low code before that, or was that kind of the first time you came across low code?
So, like low code is such a, I'm not still convinced most people really understand what that is. Technically it's just visual development. And, most developers know visual development in general has been around, even since the 90s, like, Visual Basic, for example, like, which is primarily
Yeah,
front end visual development, right? Um, but I'm trying to think, there's also like stuff like Dreamweaver for like web application development. I did that too when I was trying to learn web application development. But low code in the terms that we know now didn't come across until I was interviewing or learning about OutSystems. So I got laid off from a job, and I talked to some recruiters because I typically try to go through recruiters to find
yeah,
jobs, and they asked me, oh, describe me your job from the previous job, and once I did it, like, oh, this kind of sounds like OutSystems. It not really, but it was like mobile
yeah,
application development
yeah,
and lots of hand coding, but like, oh, this might be interesting. So like I knew nothing about the company, and I still remember like when I went through the interview process, Andre Madeira, he was like the manager of the
yeah.
solution arc or the sales engineers at the time, and he called
Mm.
me on a Friday. He's like, okay, learn this thing. You're gonna be tested on a Monday to pitch back to us. So that was kind of like how I learned at least low code in the way OutSystems does it.
Yeah.
So I was blown away. So that's a whole separate conversation, but that's kind of how I
Yeah,
came
I
across
was
it.
gonna say, like, when you actually had to go away and then do that, preparation, what was your kind of thoughts of the platform? That this is 10 years ago. Obviously, it's changed a lot since, but how was it 10 years ago?
I was I was blown away. Like, I knew nothing about the product, the technology, and like I said, when I was, like what 10 years before that, I was doing PHP,
Mm.
programming with MySQL backend, building web applications for fun and for like neighbors and HOAs and stuff. And I still remember like one of the last comments I did as my interview ended on that Monday. I said, "Holy crap! I just built something in 15 minutes that would take me weeks to build, in the way that I was doing it traditionally." And I was like, I wish I had this, back then. So it was truly like something that just blew me away. Like as a developer, like, oh my God, I could get stuff done and there's like no bugs. Like there's a lot less bugs because so much of it is just automated. It's just abstraction, right? And we could talk about that more, but
Yeah.
yeah, I fell incredibly in love at that time. I'm like, this makes development just fun because you're not struggling with like silly bugs that you take like an hour to try to figure out. Maybe I'm just a bad programmer, but that tends to happen a lot. You're like
Yeah.
developing, you're like, dang it, it's not working, and then you spend like 3 hours trying to debug it, and you fix it. It's like, oh God, there was a missing semicolon or something silly, right? And then so those frustrations were so minimal when I was just learning the product over the weekend and building stuff. I was like, holy cow, you could just get stuff done. So that was my first experience with low code, at least with the way OutSystems
Yeah.
does it.
Yeah. And there's this thing about conversation about obviously people with a software development background can pick up our systems quite easily and kind of be a senior pretty fast. What was your kind of experience of, you know, obviously you did that quite fast, but how long did you think it took you until you felt you were really kind of at a, good level with the platform?
Yeah, that is something I like to explain to people when they come, because low code really is a huge space, and I
Yeah.
personally feel like there's two primary ways, companies are trying to solve it. But myself and my experience with OutSystems, I remember when they came in, they told me like, okay, you're gonna be sales engineer, but you're also gonna part time be working on an actual project for a customer, so it gets
Hmm.
you hands on, which I thought was a really
Yeah.
good experience. And I
Yeah.
would say I was doing it part time, maybe an hour or two a day, and it took me
Mm.
about 2 weeks for me to feel comfortable, like, in the IDE and knowing what to do.
Yeah.
But my like I said, I'll say full speed of like being able to just go exactly without thinking where do I need to go. Took about 2 months of part-time work, like I said, 1 or 2 hours a day on
Yeah.
the real project. And I mean, yeah, then I'm like flying, knowing exactly where to go. Because
Yeah.
the biggest learning curve I tell people is like when you go from assembly language to C or C++ to like JavaScript or some other PHP or language. It's a text-based language, and now you're learning another text-based language. So the learning curve is not as difficult as a completely different IDE where almost everything is done visually. So I always tell people it's like learning curve is primarily the IDE, not what do I need to type, right? Where do I
Yeah.
go in the IDE is more of the learning curve than what do I need to type. So to me, I noticed from the couple of experiences I've had just showing the platform of other people doing jump starts and doing hackathons is like that's where I see people struggle because it's a paradigm shift of how you have to learn it. But once you learn it, like I said, it just blows your mind on how fast you get stuff done.
Yeah, yeah. And you spoke about obviously you're blown away by the platform. Did you have conversations at the time with people who may were not aware of OutSystems and what the platform did, who, when you explained it, were still kind of skeptical, like, oh, not kind of believing in what you're saying?
Yeah, and I have always done this pitch because, again, primarily from my experience, right? Because I
Yeah,
came out of college primarily doing C and assembly language program. Like, it's about abstraction. And it's funny because when developers or the technical people are like, well, I like to have control, so I like to write my code. And then my argument to that is, if you really want control, why aren't you writing everything in assembly language? Because then you really have control, right? But the argument there is, of course, that's inefficient, it's not productive, you'll make a lot of bugs, and so you rely on the compiler to basically convert whatever higher level language you're writing into a code that you don't have to know or understand. And of course, you could do inline assembly in some languages, right? But that's the way I like to explain it. But the hardest part is a lot of people think, oh, visual means it's for toys, visual means it's for kids,
yeah,
visual. And so that's the thing. I was actually watching something recently about like the whole AI revolution. And like if you think about what one of the things that is changing is like the way people interact with software, right? Initially people had to type everything, right? In the old days of like everything was through a
yeah,
terminal or whatever. Then you had a mouse and keyboard, so now it's a visual, so people accepted that because it's easier for the end user. But now I do feel like more and more it's going to be voice and
mm,
visual. So it's like these huge paradigm shifts of how you communicate and work with software. And similarly, like development is, I feel like, needs to go that route. So
yeah,
that's why, like, for me, it made sense. And especially without systems, when I was learning it, I was like, oh my God, you could really build stuff, not just the front end, but like the back end, the integration, all that stuff can be done just with mouse clicks so much faster without knowing what language is it using. It just gets the application built, right? So that's one of the things I learned using OutSystems specifically was like that's a part that blew me away. Like you could do things so much faster, easier with like less bugs.
yeah, yeah. And in your 10 years at OutSystems, you've had multiple roles along the way. One of them
Oh man.
involved, going back to Japan. Can you talk me through how that came about? Was it something you initiated, or why you? Obviously, I know why you, but it'd be good to kind of hear, that a bit
Yeah,
about that.
it's. I'll be honest. I was lucky. Like I'll be completely honest. I was very lucky. I was in the right place at the right time. The opportunity. I'm super lucky to have had it. With that said, so the story is, I was actually on vacation with my ex-wife in Brazil, and the HR guy from the office who I got along with well, he
Yeah,
calls me. He's like, "Hey, what do you think about going to Japan for OutSystems?" I started laughing because I thought he was joking. Because he and I would
yeah,
always joke in the office all the
yeah,
time.
yeah,
We do
yeah, yeah.
practical jokes with each other. So what happened was, at that time, I guess almost 10, no, yeah, almost 10 years ago or 9 years ago when this conversation started. Um, they, one of our largest customers in Japan, Toyota, was asking OutSystems to have an office, like an actual local presence in
Yep.
Japan. And so at that time, globally, we only had about 400 employees, plus or minus. And out of the global people, I was the only person who could natively speak Japanese. And I
Yeah.
happened to be a sales engineer, which they needed over in Japan. So that's why HR asked me, hey, would you be willing to go maybe for a few years, 2, 3 years, 1, 2, 3 years, build out the office, hire people, train people. Because my kids are here, so I couldn't make a permanent
Yeah,
move.
of course.
Um, so that's how it started. I moved in January 2017 officially after finding an apartment there. So I was there for 2.5 years. And as far as experience, like the first year was really hard. So one thing most people don't understand is my Japanese is good enough. My parents sometimes make fun. No, seriously,
Yeah, yeah.
it was good enough. I mean, I
Yeah.
could go there, I could talk to people, I could
Hmm.
understand most things. Reading and writing is a very big weakness of mine because that's
Yeah.
very different than conversational. So I remember like so I went to Japan and met our first employee there, who was Arnold Konsenko. He's actually an American Filipino guy who's been in Japan for over, a decade or
Wow.
two, and so his Japanese was better than me, with an American accent. And so he and
Yeah,
I
yeah,
pretty
yeah.
much had the whole thing for the first year. And
Hmm.
the first year was really hard because I also did support in Japanese because again, I'm the
Wow.
only person that could do
Yeah, yeah.
Japanese. Like I said, my reading and writing skills are not like I'm elementary school level for reading and
Yeah.
writing.
Yeah.
And so I had to use Google Translate a lot, like with emails and stuff. And
Yeah.
so it was rough. And there's a funny story here. I had a meeting with a partner in Japan with Arnold, and I came out and I had to talk. This was probably like the second or third meeting with a partner. And I turned to him and I said, Arnold, you realize I only understand about 60 to 80% of what people are saying. And so he understood that. So through my 2.5 years there, I had
Hmm.
to, if I'm there with a sales rep who they're all bilingual, I had to ask
Hmm.
like, what do they mean by this? And they had to
Yeah,
explain
yeah,
to me in
yeah.
English, and I'm like, oh, okay. And then I explained in
Yeah.
Japanese. But there's one very funny story. We were in a meeting with a partner, and it was someone was up there on the whiteboard and just talking. There's this term called sentakasuru,
Okay.
and the only word I knew growing up, sentakasuru, what that means is doing laundry. So I'm like, what? Like it took me like the whole meeting, and afterwards I had to look it up and I'm like, oh, it means selecting something like from a drop down list.
Yeah, okay.
So it's just a funny story because like my parents are always like making fun. It's like, oh, we're gonna do laundry. No, we need to select something, kind of. But like I said, it was a incredible experience. By the time I left there in 2000 June 2019, we had about 24 employees. I really enjoy like training people, helping people. I'm almost like a nurturing kind of person. Like I
Yeah.
enjoy letting people like learn, helping them grow and stuff. So
Hmm.
that was an incredibly good experience. Like I said, I was lucky to be at the right person at the right in the right place at the right time because that was like a very big, important experience for me.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
And, as we can see now, there's, the Japanese community is quite big, in for out
oh yeah,
systems.
yeah,
Back then, what was it like, how did kind of, it's a total different region, right? Even though you're born there, like you said, you moved to the
yes,
US.
cultural
It's
differences. I
cultural
actually learned
differences,
a
right?
lot more. I actually learned a lot more about the culture I didn't know, especially in the business sense.
Well,
I mean, there's
yeah,
so many intricacies that I did not know about, so it was super interesting.
yeah, yeah. And how did, businesses kind of take to, this? Obviously, you had a good reference point in Toyota that, they're now using OutSystems, but, other kind of new companies kind of looking at it. What was the kind of initial reaction to OutSystems?
Well, in Japan, like they do tend to follow, well-known companies like Toyota doing
Mm,
something, so that actually helped in terms of trust, even though it's
yeah,
a foreign company,
yeah,
and they don't tend to trust a lot of foreign companies. It's more, they're more of a group mentality culture where it's like they trust themselves more than
yeah.
other external places. But again, like us being there helped in terms of OutSystems themselves, and also having someone like Toyota being a champion, and then
Mm,
other large companies kind of followed suit, and so that kind of influence of other large companies, using the platform for like critical applications did kind of help, and I think as far as I know, like I've talked to them recently too at our FKO, and they seem to be doing really well.
yeah.
Definitely better than the US in terms of like trust and being able to expand that out into different businesses.
Yeah, yeah, and in your your the roles you've had majority like even now very customer facing type of roles can you tell me about some of the kind of biggest misconceptions you come across when speaking to customers about out systems and low code?
Yeah, like I said, the reps know I cringe every time we or they say low code. I'm not a fan of that term
Okay,
because most people, like I would say, yeah, the majority of people that say low code don't have the same image that OutSystems does in terms of what it
Yeah.
is. And again, this goes back to something I was, started to talk about earlier. And I understand why, because if you look at all the hundreds of vendors that do low code, I actually joke like, oh, the bakery down the street is saying they do low code. Like everybody and
Yeah.
everything is saying low code, although now it's
Yeah.
AI.
Mm.
But if you, I explain this to the reps, and we feel like this is true. Like you've got vendors, because the core problem you're trying to solve is developers who don't have time to do the things they should be doing, and they're overwhelmed, right? So there's two ways to solve that. One of it is you give them more time. The other one is you make them more productive, right? And I feel like the majority of low code development platforms out there are giving them time by giving tools so that less technical can build the ones that
Yeah.
are less critical, less important or less core applications. Citizen developers, less technical
Yeah.
people can build these applications so that developers can concentrate on more important tasks or strategic applications versus OutSystems and some of our very few competitors out there are basically looking at developers to be faster, like themselves to be faster. Because the other methodology, like we've seen customers who built these citizen developer applications, and then now it's like, oh, now it's critical, or now it's like it's being used company wide now because it's such a
Yeah.
good tool, and then now you have governance issues, scalability issues. So I do like the way that OutSystems does it. Basically, it's a single tool for developers to be more productive. So I feel like that's the biggest misconception I see, is because most people think it's the other way around, that it's all low code is
Yeah.
for citizen developers to build simple applications. I mean, pretty much, I would say at least 80% of people I start talking to prospects, that's what the assumption is. So they come with simple use cases. And I tell the reps too, I'm perfectly okay saying, your use case, we would be overkill for you. Like there's plenty of
Mm.
other vendors, low code vendors who can do all that and honestly just cheaper. And if that's all you
Mm.
need, please go there. Like I have no problem saying that.
Yeah.
And so that's when they realize, oh, what makes your platform different? Because it's really true. Like there's so many, you can build simple application systems.
Yeah.
It is overkill for that. It does too
Mm.
much more than that. I mean, the analogy, which I always do, it's like you could buy a plane to go across the street. Sure, you could do that,
Yeah.
but who does that?
Yeah.
You'll get a skateboard and maybe a bicycle, but no one's gonna buy, a plane or a sports car just to go across the street, or a walker for that matter, or a
Yeah.
wheelchair, whatever. But that's the way I always explain it. And so the biggest misconception I see is like, what can it do? And the automatic assumption in 80% of cases, and again, I'm surprised after all these years, people still aren't getting the differences. Is maybe it's
Yeah.
because the way the analysts are saying it.
Yeah.
Is that difference on how do you solve that problem, right? And OutSystems is one of extremely very few companies that are doing it that way. So that's my opinion on
Yeah. Yeah.
what I see on how the market comes to us.
Yeah, I agree with obviously people see the Gartner and all these kind of, reports, and they're all on the kind of one, you know,
Right. And I'm
thing,
like, you
right? So
can't, it's
it's
not
confusing to say, well, okay, they must all do the same thing when actually
right.
there's only a
We solve it in
small,
a different way.
yeah, there's a real small handful of platforms, including OutSystems, that can actually go that level that you're talking about, and I think, I speak to a number of businesses who they use multiple, right? So they'll use the ones for the smaller internal where, more business people can be involved. And then if they need something kind of more larger scale, that's when something like OutSystems comes in. So it's more of using sometimes two low code platforms, even though different, rather than just saying,
Yeah.
we're going to use one for everything.
Right. And then the use case really does matter. And like I said, like there's a lot in that we do talk to. I would say like half of them come to be. I'm just like, oh, if that's it, then we're overkill. Please go to the other vendors. Like
Yeah.
I personally have no problem saying that because it's true. Like I don't want them to like use it and be like, whoa, we just bought a plane to go
Yeah.
across the street, and
Yeah.
like we look bad. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
that's how I see it.
Yeah. And when you're, obviously there's traditional software's been around forever, and it will be around, how do you, position, when you're speaking to customers, how do you position kind of OutSystems versus traditional software, where, a lot of people, that's the way they're used to. So OutSystems being disruptive software, how do you position OutSystems, to them?
Yeah, and like I think that ties back to something I said earlier. It's, you have to educate them on the different types of low code tools because like you
Mm,
said, like people aren't subdividing them like often, and
yeah,
most people's minds who are looking at them, they all think it's the same, and they're
yeah,
going by what most of them are doing, which is, taking the simple stuff away from
yeah,
developers so they have more time. But, again, I try to fall back to the analogy of, look, it's about abstraction. Like in the OutSystems case, it's about abstraction. It's like, why aren't you writing everything in assembly language? Take that same exact reason and then level it up to another level of abstraction. And I guess the other part that you see a lot is like people who are like, well, you're going to be limited. Again, everybody thinks low code is limited. Again, one of the things why I'm still here almost 10 years is like this platform lets you extend it, which is one of the key features is that, look, it doesn't, if it can't do something, you could bring in code and make it into a visual component, right? And so that's critical for people to understand. And it does help as long as you have that conversation early on, right? So as far as talking to traditional people, that's really it. And, if we have some prospects that come to us and they have no specific pain of like, we're just looking at stuff, we do traditional development. If you don't have if you're not having any problems the way you're doing it, if you don't feel like it's an issue, then it's like,
mm,
why,
yeah,
you're gonna go into a car dealership, but you didn't really need a car.
yeah,
Sure, just look, but
yeah,
for the people that are like, we need to be more productive with our software development, we're having issues with maintenance, scalability, the current systems aren't working well. Again, depending on the use case, if it's a small use case, go to the other vendors. If you need something more complex, I do tell people like, how many low code vendors have had their customers build ERPs and CRMs. That does say a lot because
yeah,
OutSystems customers have. Not saying that that's a common use case, but the fact that
yeah,
they're able to do that really does make an explanation of what you're able to do with the platform versus a lot of other low code vendors. That's not what their target is, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And a lot of the roles you've had have been on the kind of architecture side, but you had a brief stint in the community side. What kind of made you kind of make that kind of change and move?
You know, there are a couple of reasons, but I guess the most important things I can say is like, it kind of goes along with what we're just talking about, like getting
Mm,
people to understand what the platform is, getting the word out, getting the community to grow, and I thought it was a kind of a good, interesting challenge. And I'll be honest, I was actually looking for something less stressful. It ended up being more stressful. Like, honest to God, I have a lot more respect
yeah,
for the DevRel team because their job is hard. Again, I've been here for almost 10 years. I thought we would be more mainstream. I thought more people
yeah,
would be accepting and understanding what our platform does. But
mm,
it's still a hard thing because it is a pretty big shift in mindset of
yeah,
what you've been doing so far traditionally versus something like, what our platform does. But so I did that for a year. It's almost embarrassing to say, oh, then I kind of realized, one, it's very hard to do.
yeah,
Two, it is I have more respect for that team, and that's really what it was. I wanted to try something different that was challenging, a little bit less stress, but it actually ended up being a lot more stress, and it was extremely challenging. Like, community is very hard, especially for a platform like ours where people are misunderstanding and not fully understanding what the platform does.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's kind of what happened. And now back to my original role. So
Yeah, yeah, and yeah. You're a lead architect right now. And that obviously involves speaking to customers all the time. Can you tell us some architectural considerations that when designing scalable solutions without systems? When you're speaking to customers.
yeah, and this also ties back to what we've been saying, right? Like, one of the differences in our systems, you could build extremely scalable applications, but that doesn't mean, it's like just because you have a hammer doesn't mean you know how to use it. It's still a
Yeah,
tool. So I do remind people, especially like in the earlier conversations, the skill set you need is your most typical developer skill sets of understanding how to build, reusable architectures, modular architectures. Like, you still need to have at least like a team lead that knows that. So maybe the junior developers don't fully understand how to
yeah,
architect things well, but you still have to build, you know, uh, uh, reliable or at least efficient interfaces, efficient modular architecture. So that's why I tell people it's like, again, because the platform is very different than most other low code vendors, it's
yeah,
like you still need to be a developer mindset. Ignore the specific language you know. But you know, like any software engineer on any language, you have to know, you know, like what data structures do I need to use for
Yeah.
input output will be efficient. You know, how to make, you know, certain things more efficient. How do I design things so they're architecture modular so that different teams can work on it, make them scalable. Like those things still apply in out systems, and that's the thing, right? Most low code vendors,
Yeah.
it's not designed for that because you're not going to build something that complex.
Yeah.
So that you take the easy stuff away from developers. Now systems you can, and that's what we want people to do. So that's why I tell people architecture is still important. I guess if anything, one thing I used to say, I don't know how the boot camps are now. I think you and I talked
Mm.
about this before, but
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
one of my complaints when they came to OutSystems was they really should teach at least basic architecture in the first boot
Mm.
camp, because I know
Mm.
in the older days that used to be the second advanced boot camp.
Yeah.
So actually, when I was in Japan, that's the other thing I had. So I was actually doing training also. So I did the support, I
Nice.
did the sales engineering, and I also did like the training materials, the boot camps
Yeah.
in Japanese, because again, there's no one else that
Nice.
can do it.
Yeah.
And that's something I used to tell people all the time, every time I did do boot camps in English in the US and Japan too. It was like, architecture is important because it's
Yeah.
still it's still a platform where, you know, it's just a tool. You could still build things wrong. And so you need to have a developer mindset, typical developer mindset, that understands how to build scalable, you know, reusable modular architectures that are, you know, future proof in a sense. So I do say that
Yeah.
that's really important to learn.
Yeah.
At least one team lead member of a team, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm interested to know, when you're, because you're meeting, customers all the time. If you're ever in the room with a non-technical business leader, what kind of, I could imagine sometimes having a non-technical business leader and a really technical person in the room can have a bit of back and forth and a bit of frustration, maybe that, why they're not
Yeah.
getting it, or why they're not, have you got an example or something like that you've been through?
Um, I can't remember anything specifically. Because what will usually happen, and again, this goes back to my comment about like the assembly language answer, is I have been in some situations at least 3 times over the 9.5 years where you have someone very technical. It's, you know, one person might be like, "Oh, I love writing JavaScript." It's like and then the business person just wants them to be more productive, have
Yeah.
less bugs, build things faster, get to the more strategic applications. So it's interesting to see that kind of like headbutting. Actually, I was at a conference one time and I met up with some people. Two of them were business people, and I showed them, I explained to them the product, I did a demo, and they were just like, "Holy cow, this is awesome! Let me go my engineer." And the engineer lady came and says, "Oh no, no, yeah, we don't, we don't need that." And she was adamant, and I'm just like, "Look, you could build this thing. It takes like 2 weeks." And she's like, "Oh, I could do it in less than that." I'm like some people, you know what it is? Like seriously, some people just want to use a very specific screw or nail to build something because that's what they love.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that's not what this is for. You have to have the mindset like when I did, when I came to when I like I said when I interviewed in the OutSystems and had a
Yeah.
weekend to learn it. You have to have the mindset of it's not the language, it's the end product that you need to get done with less bugs and less effort and less frustration. Like if you're able to, and again, there are developers that can feel that way, and the developers like, I love Java, I love JavaScript, I love PHP, and they just only want the tool in the specific ingredients, right? As opposed to, I want to get it done quicker, I want to have less bugs, I want to have to do less debugging. Like if you're not that kind of a developer and you have people who are the negative side that are very specific, it's hard to move forward. Like any company who
Yeah.
has those type of developers, it's hard to like get them to be productive because you're pretty much stuck. It's like someone saying, "Oh, I love assembly language." What are you going to do with that person,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
They have to that you have to have employees or developers that are more open minded to be like get stuff done faster with less debugging. Why wouldn't that be the end goal? So it blows my mind when I see developers who are like, "Oh, I love this technology." Technologies change, are always improving, and if you're just stuck on like COBOL, oh, I love COBOL, well, I mean, you're going to be left behind.
Yeah.
Realistically, and businesses don't want people shouldn't want people like that. Businesses should want people who are like, I want to get it done fast and be rewarded for that. Like that should really be the end goal. It doesn't matter what language. Yeah, sure, some
Yeah.
languages are more fun than others, but the
Yeah.
business just needs it done. I mean, that's the end. That's the real end goal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Definitely. Definitely. And talking about speed and AI as well, kind of being you know talked about everywhere, and OutSystems releasing Mentor, at the conference, kind of coming out. I'm interested to know, one, your view on Mentor, and two, someone who speaks to customers, and obviously OutSystems is showcasing Mentor. What's the feedback like?
Uh, People are excited, right? Some of them are hesitant probably because of, where's the information coming from, but most
Mm,
people are looking at like, because we could demonstrate that, right? You can, put a prompt in, or you could upload an actual requirements document, and it'll generate based off of it. And I think the reality, and we tend to pitch this, right? The whole point of that is to increase the beginning part of the software development lifecycle of getting to almost like an MVP, right?
yeah,
But not necessarily MVP all the time, but you've got this timeline of, starting with nothing, and then you've got, an end goal of the actual version one release of a product. If you can get to that, 40, 50, 60%, maybe 70%, again, depending on the requirements document
yeah,
and depending on, Mentor becoming better, because, generative AI is always getting smarter,
yeah,
better, more specific. Why not? I mean, people are blown away when you actually show it. Like, oh, give me a requirements document. Let me upload it. Let's have it build the first 40 to 60% of the application. And with a full understanding that it's a starting point and you tweak it. And it's just like any other Gen AI thing. It's a starting point, but look what it did within that certain amount of time, that if you didn't have that, how long would that have taken you?
yeah.
Right? So if you look at it that way, I mean, people are just blown away at how much you can shrink that timeline of coming up with an application, whether it's through a prompt or through a requirements document.
Yeah, I was at the Gartner conference last year in Vegas, and obviously it was very AI heavy, and they're talking about, business leaders not really having, they're all talking about AI, but not really knowing the way forward. Do you feel this addresses that a little bit, where, it's helping the conversations compared to maybe last year when you were speaking to customers?
Uh, you know, Personally, I think there's so many places you can use AI, right? I'm a big fan of the future of a bunch of AI agents working together, like, almost like modular AI agents that have specific tasks that they're really, really good at with I forgot what the term is. There's like a higher level AI that
Yeah,
you interface with, and then communicates and manages all the different tasks by the AI agents that are specific to certain fields. That's another area where I feel like software development and engineering is going to. But specific to Mentor, I mean, it's one of the ways that you can use AI, right? It's like generate,
mm,
just like you could create your background images or whatever images
yeah,
in using generative AI now. It's the point of accelerating that beginning part. So Mentor is more specific, or the Mentor app gen, I should say, because Mentor is
yeah,
a whole umbrella of different tools,
yeah,
right? The Mentor app gen is primarily about that accelerating the beginning part, because that's such an easy, low hanging fruit for AI right now, right? Again, because AI is always going to get better, to get that done now and bring it to the platform, so that acceleration for that timeline is available now because we have that technology. And again, understanding it's a starting point. You tweak it, you modify it. Again, without systems, you have the flexibility to extend that within the IDE and tweak it even visually, right? So I feel like that is, timing wise, I think that's just a low hanging fruit.
yeah,
In the future, I think there's going to be other AI agent pockets that are going to be coming out. I mean, we have AI agent builder also
yeah,
to start with that, but that's still kind of, text based versus like you creating a specific module that does input output. I mean, you could wrap it, but the fact that you'll have AI agents within an application that can be piggybacked off of an application you pre-built using, Mentor AI and Mentor App Gen to build that initial thing, and then create integrations and bringing in AI agents to that. Beyond that, I'm not a fortune teller, but
yeah, yeah,
I think that's pretty exciting to know that that's where we're going. And again, it's all about, for me, it's all about getting that software out there that works with less bugs, right? Like
yeah,
that's less debugging. And I feel like, yeah, I mean that's the next, that makes sense to me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And over the last kind of 10 years, low code in the whole, I think most people now know low code out systems, as one of the leaders. How do you feel the US market in itself? being in OutSystems for nearly 10 years, based on conversations 10 years ago to now, how do you feel it's evolved, and are more people open to it? Are conversations, I don't want to say easier, but just kind of a bit more easier because it's more well known?
Yeah, I guess if you do enough research in low code, right, OutSystems will come up. And
Yeah,
some people just don't do the research and they just know like, basic stuff like Power Apps or something. And they assume
yeah,
everything else is the same.
yeah,
But it, I'll be honest, like again, I've been OutSystems 9.5 years, and I'm actually like disappointed. Like the whole industry hasn't accepted and understood the different ranges of low code in a
yeah,
sense, right? Um, Even the brand recognition, I mean, obviously, OutSystems is more recognized than, like 6, 7 years ago, of course,
yeah,
just because, things just get more recognized
yeah,
over time. But one thing I said, like when like ChatGPT and all those things started coming out last year, one thing I mentioned is I feel like that's gonna help
mm,
accept low code because again, it's about abstraction. Like,
yeah,
AI is allowing a level of abstraction and interaction into a system that's a black box that you're just trusting. And so I feel like and people are slowly slowly
yeah,
accepting Gen AI and just AI tools because I mean it's really a matter of trying it and seeing the proof that it works, right? Low code I just feel like was a harder thing because what is it, 1950s or so when high level languages came out, right? And
yeah,
what is it, like 75 years people have been hand coding high level
yeah,
languages to build applications. So changing that mindset is just hard, right? So I feel like accepting something like, AI tools and Gen AI opens up people's minds a little bit at least about accepting abstraction and trusting systems to build things that they want, even though they might not see the underlying, nuts and bolts,
yeah,
would help people accept low code as at least an intermediary, platform as opposed
mm,
to going between, traditional code and Gen AI level conversations and applications. Low code obviously is a higher level than traditional, so I feel like people will accept it more because again, it is largely about like abstraction and productivity. But we'll see. I mean, I'm hopeful on that, but we'll see. I mean, it's not under my control, so
yeah, of course, yeah, yeah. And I'm interested to know, obviously, you spoke about, all low code is not the same. If what name would you give it if you didn't call out systems low code? What would you put it under?
I someone else asked me that a while ago, and I couldn't have a right answer. I just cringe when people say low code and analysis in the same sentence because then I
Yeah,
know like their expectation is something very
yeah,
different. Um, I don't know. The closest thing I could come up with like visual development, but then people think like Visual Basic. It's like
yeah,
that's just UI, and then you still have to
yeah,
code. So I don't have a right answer. I'm not creative enough to come up with a good answer.
yeah.
I'm the least creative person you ask that question to. I don't have a good answer.
Okay,
I just all my reps that I work with know I
yeah,
cringe and I don't like saying every time someone says low code, I'm like, what does that mean to you? Because
yeah,
again, most people are like, oh, it's for citizen developers to build simple
yeah,
applications. Like 90%, 89% of the time, that's what I hear. And it's like,
yeah,
well, let me explain to you how we do
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. No,
So, yeah.
definitely, I get it. And if you were to, if you don't know if you've done anything yourself, or if you had the opportunity to build, anything yourself using the OutSystems platform, what would it be?
So that's interesting because I don't think it's interesting because like when we talk to prospects, it's like, oh wait, what should we build in out systems? And my answer is always like, well, what do you normally build? Because again, that's the difference in the different vendors, right? Without systems,
Yeah,
you could build the simple applications, you could build the complex applications, and if you need to extend the platform, you could because you can bring in code and make them into visual components, right? So um, my answer to that's literally like, what application would you build as opposed to what would you build in out system, because it's really true. Like again, this is what I was blown away by.
mm,
Like what I'll give a simple example. Like my personal project when I was working or doing the interview with out systems was I was building the HOA, the neighborhood I lived in. They were throwing Excel sheets, emailing attachments across
yeah,
multiple residents, and they lost track of who was paying the annual dues and everything, and
yeah,
then they were doing checks. So I literally basically build a web application in PHP and MySQL, using a
Okay.
database, keeping track of when things are due, when payments are done. I did an API into PayPal so people can pay into PayPal, and it automatically updates their statuses. So I'm a big fan of like automation, so that one, there's less mistakes, and two, it's less manual labor. I've always, even in like college and high school, like I loved automating things so that manual labor sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, chance of mistakes. So what I would build, again, OutSystems or not, what I get obsessed with, I look at someone's processes and I'm like, that's inefficient, or good God, you're making a lot of mistakes there, and people are wasting time because you have to fix those mistakes, or there's some cost involved with those mistakes,
Yeah.
right? So like even within my family, within friends, I'm like, oh, we should use this tool to do this, to automate this. Like I'm a huge fan of that. So most likely, again, not specific OutSystems, but I would use OutSystems because I can't see why you wouldn't, is like automating some inefficient processes, or that are either manual or just broken in terms of creates mistakes and is costly. So that could be integrating to multiple systems, having a workflow that's automated, doing calculations, making decision making, and maybe there's approval process. Ensure, like, maybe if it's a simple application that you don't have a tool for, you build it from scratch, because again, without systems it'd be
Yeah.
faster, and that could be part of the equation of that automating processes, and having less mistakes and manual labor. That's what I get passionate about. So it would be something related to that, because I would love to like walk around as a consultant to different businesses and be like, all right, where are
Yeah.
you wasting time? Where can you automate? Where do you have a lot of mistakes within the employees that are costing
Yeah.
you money? And let's fix that. And let's make it so that so that's what software is good at, right? So that's what I would do. And that's, to me, those are the type of projects that I love people building on OutSystems.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. And finally, I won't say low code in the question. I'll say, what would be your message to, skeptics of systems, people who, are still skeptical. It tends to be more traditional people still, what would be your message to people who are still skeptical?
I mean, if it's a developer, I would be like, what's more important to you? The actual code you're writing, like the language specifically, or do you care that you can do things faster and get your software actually out the door with less debugging? Because everybody hates debugging. Debugging is a pain. That's the
Yeah.
worst part of programming, right? And because you're pulling your hair out and it's like some silly mistake or you
Yeah.
misunderstood something, you have to be, as a developer, or at least a technical person, you have to be open minded to be like, what goal do you have? Is it like, do you have to use what you're using now, or can you be open minded if it gives you, like, even if it gives you, like I tell people, even if it gives you 2x productivity, which should be extremely simple without systems, right? It's really easy to go 2x faster without systems. Is it worth it to you to try out a platform that can give you that productivity to build whatever you want, your web and mobile applications, right? Like if that's valuable, then it's worth opening your eyes to see a paradigm shift of the possibilities, right? And then for like the business people that come to us, I'm like, make sure you understand the differences in low code, because again, like I said, I understand majority of vendors are
Yeah.
for citizen developers to do simple projects. I get that. That's how they're trying to solve the problem, by giving developers time. We're not doing that. We're trying to make developers be more productive through all the different projects, so that in case they need to be, super scalable and across, multiple corporate, departments, then you could still continue to build those things. And also probably from the business side, like look at what people are building successfully on the platform, right? Because again, if you look at use cases that have been successful, or case studies that have been successful in each different tool sets, you get an understanding of what they're building, and go talk to the people who have successfully built things. Again, this is for the business people, right? Because developers don't care
Yeah.
about that. They just
Yeah. Yeah.
care
Yeah.
about, how am I going to build this? What does it
Yeah.
give me as a developer, right? And so for the developer, again, open your mind to, if you had the power, and this is another thing I say, if you had the power to create your own development language, right, and you want it to be more productive, how would it be? And I feel like a lot of people would design something like OutSystems, where you do
Yeah.
everything visually from the front end to the back end to the integrations, like all that. Because one of the things I used to say is like, well, most developers have not done this. You write your code and you have to document it. And normally when you document it, what do you have? You have charts, you have flow charts. Well, what if you're doing the flow charts, the documentation first, and it's creating the code for you? Like, it's kind of an analogy I like to use. So it's not too far from the way you have to think anyway. You still have to think visually in your head, like what's the flow, in terms of the logic flow. So it's like you have to be open-minded and just think of the real goal you're trying to achieve, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with being that person that makes furniture using their hand tools. There's nothing wrong with that. There's an art to that,
Yeah.
of course, but that's not a business like IKEA, right? Who's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
trying
yeah.
to be more
Yeah.
efficient and productive with their products. So really depends on where you want to be, but that's why I say there's two different sets of ways to need to look at it before you understand and learn what low code, at least without systems, is really about, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. Well, it's a good note to end on. So now I appreciate you taking the
Sure.
time, sharing your experiences and insights. Are very valuable and great to see kind of, and hear about, you've worked across two regions, very different ways of kind of working as well. So I appreciate you sharing that.
No problem. I appreciate you giving me the time to ramble,
Thanks,
to talk
Taka.
a lot.
No, it was great. It was amazing. I'm sure people find it very valuable.
Sure.
Thank you, Taka.